Ketharin stood before the great windows of the Galactic Concord archives, his 4 eyes scanning the data tablet in his hands with growing disappointment. The assignment was beneath him, and everyone in the chamber knew it. "Humans," he said, the word leaving his mouth like something sour. "You want me to travel 6,000 light-years to study humans." Elder Vorath, his mentor of 40 cycles, remained still in his hovering chair, his ancient face betraying nothing as he watched his young student struggle with the news. "The Concord has documented warfare across 300,000 species," Vorath replied, his voice thin and patient. "We do not choose our assignments based on personal interest, Ketharin. We choose them based on necessity." "But humans are nothing," Ketharin protested, setting the tablet down on the crystalline table with more force than he intended. "They have been spacefaring for barely 3 centuries. They still use kinetic weapons and chemical propulsion on half their fleet, and they cannot even unify their own species under one government." He pulled up the holographic display, showing a small blue and green world spinning in the darkness of the outer spiral arm. "They are fractured into dozens of competing nation-states that argue over resources and ideology," he continued. "They have no psychic abilities, no natural armor, no redundant organ systems, and their average lifespan is less than a single century." Vorath listened without interruption, his long fingers folded together as Ketharin made his case. "They have never fought a major interstellar war," Ketharin finished. "What could I possibly learn from them that would benefit the archives?" The elder was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Ketharin pause. "The Concord has studied 10,000 species that wage war," Vorath said slowly. "We have watched empires rise and fall. We have documented extinction events and galactic conquests. We have seen species that fight for territory, for reproduction, for honor, and for faith." He leaned forward, and his ancient eyes locked onto Ketharin with sudden intensity. "But in all our records, across all our millennia of observation, we have never encountered a species that wages war against itself so willingly, so completely, and so constantly, and yet survives." Ketharin felt a chill run through his secondary nervous system, but he pushed it aside. "That only proves they are primitive," he said. "Does it?" Vorath asked, and then he waved his hand, dismissing the young researcher. "Go to the humans, Ketharin, watch them, document them, and when you return, we will discuss what you have learned." 2 weeks later, Ketharin found himself aboard a neutral observation vessel, watching the stars streak past as the ship traveled through compressed space toward the human border territories. He spent the journey reviewing everything the archives had collected on humanity, and the more he read, the less impressed he became. Their history was a chaos of violence and contradiction, a species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times through war and environmental negligence, yet somehow clawed its way back from the edge each time. They had developed nuclear weapons before they had developed stable fusion power. They had created artificial intelligence before they had solved basic resource distribution, and they had colonized other worlds while still fighting wars on their homeworld. It made no sense to Ketharin, whose own species, the Velshani, had achieved unified governance before they had even developed writing. How could a species so divided, so chaotic, so seemingly self-destructive have survived long enough to reach the stars? The answer, he decided, was simple luck, nothing more. His ship arrived at the human border world of New Helsinki 3 days before everything changed. The world was pleasant enough, a temperate planet with vast oceans and sprawling cities that mixed architectural styles from dozens of human cultures, and Ketharin found the humans themselves to be surprisingly welcoming. They were strange to look at, soft and fragile with only 2 eyes and a single cardiovascular system, but they smiled easily and seemed genuinely curious about his presence. He set up his observation post in the capital city and began his documentation, recording everything from their military parades to their training exercises, from their weapons development to their fleet compositions. And then the Kreeth Dominion made contact. The Kreeth were not unknown to the archives. They were an insectoid species with a hive mind structure, aggressive and expansionist, with a fleet that outnumbered the humans by a factor of 15. They had exterminated 6 species in their expansion across the eastern galactic arm, and they had never accepted surrender, preferring to consume their enemies rather than subjugate them. Their ultimatum to humanity was simple: surrender 3 colony systems, including New Helsinki, or face total war. Catharin watched the human response with clinical detachment, expecting the usual diplomatic scramble, the desperate search for allies, the gradual acceptance of inevitable defeat. Instead, he watched something he had never seen before. The humans refused. Not through negotiation, not through counteroffers, not through appeals to galactic law or requests for mediation. They simply said no. The president of the United Terran Federation, a woman named Chen Weilin, broadcast her response across all frequencies, and Catharin recorded every word. The Kreeth Dominion has demanded that we abandon our people to be slaughtered and consumed, she said, her voice steady and cold. They have threatened us with extinction if we do not comply, and they believe that fear will make us kneel. She paused, and when she spoke again, there was something in her voice that Catharin could not identify, something between rage and absolute certainty. "We will not kneel," she said. "We will not surrender a single world, a single station, a single human life to these monsters, and if they want a war, then we will give them one they will never forget." The broadcast ended, and Catharin sat in his observation post, running calculations on his data tablet. The numbers were not complicated. The Kreeth had superior numbers, superior technology, and a proven track record of total victory. The humans had no allies, limited resources, and a fleet that was barely adequate for border defense. By every metric the archives used to predict military outcomes, humanity would be extinct within 18 months. Catharin recorded his first official observation in the mission log, his fingers moving slowly across the interface as he chose his words carefully. "The humans have refused the Kreeth ultimatum," he wrote. "This decision is statistically suicidal, as the Kreeth have never lost a war of extinction, and the humans lack the military capacity to resist a full invasion. I do not understand why they have chosen this path, but I will remain to document the outcome." He paused, looking out his window at the human city below, where lights were coming on in millions of windows as families gathered for their evening meals, unaware or uncaring that their species had just been marked for death. "I believe I am about to witness the end of humanity," he concluded. "It should not take long." He was wrong about that. He was wrong about everything. The human dreadnought Thermopylae was nothing like Catharin had expected. He had studied warships from dozens of species, elegant Velshani cruisers designed for precision strikes, massive Kreeth hive carriers that moved like living organisms, sleek Taurani battleships that seemed to dance through space. The Thermopylae was none of these things. It was brutal and ugly, a mountain of armor and weapons that seemed designed not to win battles but to survive them. And as Catharin walked through its corridors for the first time, he felt like he was inside the body of some ancient predator. Captain Yuki Tanaka met him at the airlock, a small woman with dark hair cut short and eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. "You are the Velshani observer," she said, and it was not a question. "I am Catharin of the Galactic Conquered Archives," he replied. "I am here to document your military practices for the historical record." Something flickered across her face, something that might have been amusement or might have been contempt, and then she nodded. "Document whatever you want," she said. "Just stay out of the way when the shooting starts." She turned and walked away, and Catherine followed her into the heart of the ship. What he found there confused him more than anything in the archives had prepared him for. Human military culture was chaos. Soldiers gathered in groups, talking loudly, laughing at jokes he did not understand, playing games of chance with small colored rectangles, and listening to music that ranged from beautiful to painful. He watched a young Marine paint a symbol on her armor, a red figure that she called a devil, and when he asked her why, she grinned and said it was for luck. Luck is not a measurable factor in combat, he told her. Neither is fear, she replied, but we bring that too. He did not understand what she meant. He interviewed crew members throughout the ship, recording their responses to standard psychological assessment questions, and what he found disturbed him deeply. They knew they were outmatched. Every single one of them understood the numbers, understood that the Kreeth fleet was larger, faster, and more powerful, understood that the odds of survival were minimal. And yet they did not despair. A grizzled sergeant named Morrison laughed when Catherine asked him if he was afraid. "Of course I am afraid," Morrison said. "Only idiots are not afraid before a fight, but fear is just the price of admission. It does not mean you do not show up." "But why show up at all?" Catherine asked. "Your species could negotiate, could find a way to minimize losses, could survive through strategic retreat." Morrison's smile faded, and his eyes grew hard. "You want to know why we fight?" he asked. "Because behind us are worlds full of people who have never held a weapon, children who have not learned to walk yet, old folks who just want to see one more sunrise, and if we run, they die." He leaned closer, and Catherine resisted the urge to step back. "We are not fighting because we think we can win," Morrison said. "We are fighting because someone has to stand between the monsters and the people we love, and today that someone is us." Catherine recorded the conversation, but did not know how to classify it. 2 weeks later, the Kreeth invaded. The defense of Anchorage Station would later be called the First Battle of the Human-Kreeth War, and Catherine watched it from the bridge of the Thermopylae with growing horror. The Kreeth came in overwhelming numbers, wave after wave of ships that blotted out the stars, and the human fleet met them with everything they had. It was not enough. Catherine watched human frigates torn apart by Kreeth plasma fire, watched escape pods shredded by point defense systems, watched the void fill with debris and bodies, and the silent screams of dying ships. And then something happened that he would never forget. The cruiser Adelaide, her engines crippled and her weapons offline, turned her broken hull toward the largest Kreeth carrier and accelerated. "What is she doing?" Catherine asked. Captain Tanaka did not look away from the view screen. "Her job," she said. The Adelaide struck the carrier at full speed, and both ships vanished in a ball of nuclear fire that briefly outshone the local star. Catherine stared at the expanding cloud of debris, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. "They killed themselves," he said. "They killed 3,000 Kreeth and bought us 6 minutes, Tanaka replied. "That is not suicide, that is sacrifice." But the sacrifice was not over. As the human fleet retreated, Anchorage Station itself became the final line of defense, and Catherine learned that 200 crew members had volunteered to stay behind. They could not escape. They would not surrender. Instead, they would wait until the Kreeth boarding parties entered the station, and then they would detonate the main reactor. "You cannot allow this," Catherine said, his voice rising. "This is not logical, this is not rational, this is mass suicide with no military value." Tanaka finally turned to look at him, and her eyes were like ice. "No military value?" she asked. "That station holds our defense grid codes, our fleet positions, our emergency protocols, and the locations of 3 hidden colonies. If the Kreeth take it intact, millions more will die." She stepped closer, and Catherine saw something in her face that he had never seen in any species, a grief so deep it had become fury. "Those 200 people are not dying for nothing," she said. "They are dying so that children they will never meet can grow up without Kreeth mandibles tearing out their throats, so do not stand on my bridge and tell me they have no value." The station exploded an hour later, taking 4 Kreeth assault ships with it. The battle was lost. The humans retreated, leaving behind the burning wreckage of dozens of ships and the bodies of thousands of their people. And Catharin expected to see despair, expected to see surrender, expected to see a species accepting its inevitable extinction. Instead, he saw something else entirely. The surviving crews did not weep, they did not beg, they did not abandon their posts. They were angry. Not the hot, burning anger that fades quickly, but something colder, something deeper, something that Catharin recognized from his studies of predator species. It was the anger of a wounded animal that has decided it will not die alone. Captain Tanaka stood on the bridge as the Thermopylae limped toward the fallback position, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "They think they won today," she said quietly. Catharin looked at her, confused. "They did win today," he said. "Your fleet is shattered, your station is destroyed, and you have lost 3 colony worlds in the past week alone." Tanaka smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "That is because you do not understand how humans fight," she said. "We are not like the other species you have studied. We do not break when we lose. We do not surrender when we are hurt. We do not stop fighting until the enemy is dead or we are." She turned to face him, and her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The Kreeth made a mistake today," she said. "They showed us that they cannot be reasoned with, that they will not stop until we are extinct, and now we know that this war only ends one way." "What way?" Catharin asked. Tanaka's eyes were dark and empty, and absolutely certain. "With one of us erased from existence," she said, "and it will not be us." Catharin recorded her words, but did not believe them. He would learn. Catharin had never seen a world prepare to die. He had studied civilizations in their final days, documented the slow acceptance of defeat, the quiet despair that settled over a species when extinction became inevitable. Earth was not like any of those worlds. The shuttle brought him down through the atmosphere 3 weeks after the fall of the outer colonies, and as he descended toward the human homeworld, he expected to see chaos, panic, a civilization crumbling under the weight of its coming destruction. Instead, he saw something that made his secondary heart skip a beat. Factories covered the continents like spreading wounds, their smokestacks reaching toward the sky, their assembly lines running every hour of every day. Shipyards filled the orbital spaces, their frameworks glowing with welding arcs as new vessels took shape faster than should have been possible. And everywhere, humans moved with a purpose that Catharin had never witnessed in any species facing annihilation. They were not preparing to die. They were preparing to fight. The strategic command bunker was located beneath a mountain range that humans called the Himalayas, and as Catharin descended into its depths, he felt like he was entering the brain of some vast and terrible organism. Generals from every human nation gathered around holographic displays, their uniforms different but their expressions identical, cold and focused, and utterly without mercy. He was allowed to observe their briefings, and what he heard there changed everything he thought he knew about warfare. A woman named Admiral Chen stood at the center of the room, her voice carrying to every corner as she outlined the human strategy. "The Kreeth expect us to defend our remaining colonies," she said. "They expect us to spread our forces thin trying to protect civilian populations, and they expect us to break when the losses become too great." She pulled up a map of human space, showing the Kreeth advance like a spreading stain. "We will not do any of those things," she said. "We will evacuate what we can and abandon what we cannot. We will consolidate our forces into strike groups designed for offensive operations, and we will take this war to them." A general from one of the eastern nations, raised his hand. "Admiral, our projections show that even with full mobilization, we cannot match Kreeth numbers for at least 18 months, he said. "How do we survive until then?" Chen smiled, and it was the same cold expression Catherine had seen on Captain Tanaka's face. "We make them pay for every light year," she said. "We make this war so costly that even their hive mind begins to question whether we are worth the trouble." Catherine listened as they discussed concepts that made his scales crawl. Acceptable losses, scorched earth, strategic devastation, mutually assured destruction. These were not the terms of a species fighting for survival. These were the terms of a species that had turned warfare into a science, a philosophy, an art form painted in blood and fire. After the briefing, Catherine requested access to the human historical archives, and what he found there kept him awake for 3 nights straight. Humans had been killing each other for as long as they had existed. Not the occasional territorial dispute that most species experienced, not the rare conflict over resources or ideology, but constant, unending warfare that stretched back to their earliest recorded history. They had invented weapons specifically designed to kill other humans, developed tactics to maximize casualties, created entire philosophies around the concept of destroying their enemies so completely that they could never rise again. And they had done this to themselves. Catherine read about wars where millions died in single battles, about weapons that could poison the land for generations, about campaigns of deliberate genocide that erased entire cultures from existence. The Velshani had achieved unified governance before they developed writing. Humans had developed nuclear weapons while they were still fighting wars with chemical explosives. It was insanity, pure and absolute, and yet as Catherine studied their history, he began to understand something terrible. This was not a weakness. This was practice. Humans had spent their entire existence preparing for exactly this moment, hunting their capacity for violence against the only enemy that could match them, themselves. And now that they faced a true external threat, all that terrible knowledge, all that bloody experience, all that refined and perfected brutality was being turned outward. He met Dr. Alina Vance on his 4th day in the bunker, a xenostrategist who had spent her career studying alien psychology and military doctrine. She was the one who finally explained what the Kreeth had failed to understand. "Every species we have encountered fights for logical reasons," she said, her coffee growing cold as she spoke. "Territory, resources, reproduction, dominance. These are the motivations that drive warfare across the galaxy." She pulled up a holographic display showing Kreeth battle patterns. "The Kreeth assumed we would be the same," she continued. "They assumed that when the cost of war became too high, we would calculate our odds and surrender. That is what every other species has done. That is what logic demands." "And you will not?" Catherine asked. Dr. Vance shook her head. "Humans have a concept that does not translate well into other languages," she said. "We call it spite." "Spite. The willingness to harm yourself in order to harm your enemy more," she explained. "The choice to lose everything rather than let your enemy win. The burning, irrational, absolutely human need to make sure that whoever hurts you regrets it for the rest of their existence." She leaned forward, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been pride or might have been madness. "The Kreeth think they can break us by killing our people and burning our worlds," she said. "They do not understand that every atrocity they commit does not weaken us. It makes us stronger. It gives us more reasons to fight, more fuel for the fire." She smiled. "They are not fighting a species," she said. "They are fighting a grudge with starships." On his 6th day in the bunker, Catherine witnessed the unveiling of the Gehenna Protocol. He did not understand the technical details, something about stellar manipulation and cascade reactions, but he understood the reaction of the humans in the room. They went silent. Not the silence of confusion or boredom, but the silence of people standing at the edge of an abyss and looking down into the darkness below. Even the generals, men and women who had spent their lives planning for war, seemed shaken by what they saw on the display. Admiral Chen was the first to speak. "This weapon cannot be used lightly," she said. "It is not a tool of war, it is a statement of intent." She looked around the room, and her voice was quiet but carried to every ear. "If we use this, there is no going back," she said. "The galaxy will know what humans are capable of, and they will never forget." A young officer raised her hand. "Admiral, what are your orders?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her words fell like stones into still water. "The Kreeth came to conquer us," she said. "We are going to make them wish they had never learned we existed." Ketharin recorded everything, his hands trembling slightly as he worked. He had come to study a primitive species, fighting a hopeless war. He was beginning to realize that he was watching something far more dangerous. He was watching humanity wake up. The Thermopylae moved through the darkness between stars like a shark through black water, and Ketharin watched from the observation deck as the human counteroffensive began. They called it Operation Reciprocity, and the name alone should have told him everything he needed to know. For 8 months, humanity had retreated, losing colony after colony, watching their people die by the millions, enduring the broadcasts the Kreeth sent showing what they did to captured humans. Ketharin had seen those broadcasts. He wished he had not. The Kreeth did not take prisoners. They took food, and they wanted humanity to know it, wanted them broken by horror before their fleets ever arrived. Instead, they had made a terrible mistake. They had shown humans exactly what would happen if they lost. And humans had decided not to lose. The Wolfpack fleet consisted of 37 ships, small by galactic standards but crewed by men and women who had watched their homes burn and their families die, and they moved behind Kreeth lines with a single purpose. Not defense. Not survival. Revenge. Captain Tanaka commanded the operation from the bridge of the Thermopylae, and Ketharin barely recognized her anymore. The calm, cold officer he had met at the beginning of the war had been replaced by something harder, something sharper, something that reminded him of the ancient predators in the Velshani archives, creatures that did not hunt for food but for the pure joy of the kill. "Contact," the sensor officer reported. "Kreeth supply convoy, 12 ships, minimal escort." Tanaka did not hesitate. "All ships engage," she said. "No survivors." The battle lasted less than an hour, and when it was over, 12 Kreeth vessels drifted dead in the void, their crews slaughtered, their cargo holds venting into space. Ketharin watched the human marines move through the wreckage, recording everything they found, and then they left. They did not salvage the ships. They did not take the supplies. They simply destroyed everything and moved on. "This is wasteful," Ketharin said. "Those resources could have been used for your own war effort." Tanaka looked at him, and there was nothing behind her eyes but cold fire. "We are not here for resources," she said. "We are here to make them afraid." Over the following weeks, Ketharin documented the human campaign, and what he saw defied everything he thought he knew about warfare. The humans did not fight like any species in the archives. They adapted. Kreeth shields were reverse-engineered in days, their weaknesses identified and exploited within weeks. Kreeth communication frequencies were cracked, their battle plans intercepted, their movements predicted with terrifying accuracy. Kreeth psychology was studied, analyzed, and weaponized. The hive mind structure that made the Kreeth so effective in combat also made them vulnerable, because when one part of the mind felt fear, every part felt it. And the humans had become very good at causing fear. The Battle of Vorthan's Reach would later be called the turning point of the war, and Ketharin watched it unfold with his heart in his throat. The Kreeth fleet outnumbered the humans 3-1, their formation perfect, their weapons charged, their confidence absolute. And then Captain Tanaka broadcast a message on all Kreeth frequencies. The sound that filled the void was not words. It was screaming. The death screams of a Kreeth queen, captured in a raid 3 weeks earlier, her final moments recorded as human soldiers ended her existence slowly and painfully. The effect on the Kreeth fleet was immediate and devastating. The hive mind shattered into fragments of terror and rage, ships breaking formation, weapons firing wildly, commanders losing contact with their subordinates. The humans struck in that moment of chaos, and when the battle ended, 17 Kreeth warships had been destroyed, and only 2 human vessels lost. Ketharin stared at the tactical display, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. That was psychological warfare, he said. That was justice, Tanaka replied. They broadcast what they did to our children, now they know what we do to their mothers. The war changed after Vorthan's reach. The Kreeth began to retreat, pulling back toward their home systems, abandoning the territories they had conquered, burning their own supply depots rather than let them fall into human hands. And the humans followed. They did not stop at the border of human space, did not declare victory and return home, did not offer terms of peace or negotiate a ceasefire. They kept coming. Ketharin watched as human fleets swept through Kreeth territory like a plague, destroying shipyards, burning colonies, hunting down every vessel that tried to flee. This was not war anymore. This was extermination. He confronted Captain Tanaka in her quarters, his voice trembling with something between horror and disbelief. "You have won," he said. "The Kreeth are beaten. They cannot threaten your species anymore. Why do you not stop?" Tanaka was sitting at her desk, reviewing tactical reports, and she did not look up as he spoke. "Do you know what we found on New Helsinki?" she asked quietly. Ketharin was silent. "Processing facilities," Tanaka said. "Factories where they rendered human bodies into nutrient paste, where they sorted children by age and size to determine which cuts would be the most tender." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were empty. 8 million people lived on New Helsinki, she said. "We found bones, historian, mountains of bones from people who were alive when we last spoke to them, people who trusted us to protect them." She stood, and though she was small, in that moment she seemed to fill the entire room. "You ask why we do not stop," she said. "Because if we stop, if we show mercy, if we let even one Kreeth survive to rebuild their fleets and breed new armies, then in 100 years or 1,000, they will come back." She stepped closer, and her voice was barely a whisper. "And next time we might not win." "So you will kill them all?" Ketharin asked. "Every Kreeth, every hive, every colony?" "Yes," Tanaka said, and there was no hesitation, no doubt, no mercy in her voice. "That is genocide," Ketharin said. Tanaka smiled, and it was the saddest expression he had ever seen. "Yes," she said again, "it is." She turned back to her reports, and her final words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. "The Kreeth made us into this," she said. "We will have to live with what we become, but they will not have to live with anything at all." The human fleet entered the Kreeth home system 3 months later, and Ketharin stood on the observation deck of the Thermopylae, watching the enemy homeworld grow larger in the viewscreen. Billions of Kreeth lived on that world, the heart of their civilization, the source of their hive minds and their dominion. And humanity had come to end them. Ketharin realized with cold clarity that he was not documenting a war. He was documenting the death of a species. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. The Kreeth sun was a yellow star, not unlike the one that warmed humanity's homeworld, and Ketharin watched it through the observation deck windows as the human fleet took its positions. 2 billion Kreeth lived in this system, the last survivors of a dominion that had once spanned 40 worlds, and they had gathered here for a final stand. Their fleet was shattered, their armies broken, their colonies burned, but still they fought, because the hive mind could not conceive of surrender, could not imagine a universe where they simply ceased to exist. Catherine understood now why the humans had not offered peace. The Kreeth would never have accepted it. Admiral Chen's voice came over the fleet-wide communication, and every human ship fell silent to listen. "This is Admiral Chen to all vessels," she said. "Today we end this war. Today we ensure that no human child will ever wake in the night afraid of Kreeth mandibles. Today, we remove a threat from this galaxy that should never have existed." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was heavy with something that Catherine recognized as grief. "I am not proud of what we are about to do," she said, "but I am certain that it is necessary, and I will carry this weight for the rest of my days, as will all of you." Another pause. "Gehenna Protocol is authorized," she said. "May whatever gods exist forgive us." The weapon was delivered by a single ship, a small vessel that looked almost fragile compared to the dreadnoughts surrounding it, and Catherine watched as it moved toward the Kreeth star. The Kreeth fleet tried to stop it, throwing everything they had at the approaching ship, but the human escorts formed a wall of fire and steel that nothing could penetrate. The delivery vessel reached its target and released its payload. Catherine did not understand the science behind what happened next, something about destabilizing the fusion reaction at the star's core, something about cascade failures and gravitational collapse. What he understood was the result. The Kreeth sun began to die. It happened slowly at first, a dimming of the light, a flickering that might have been mistaken for natural variation, and then it accelerated, the star's surface rippling and churning as something fundamental broke inside it. Admiral Chen broadcast one final message to the Kreeth homeworld. "You have 12 hours to evacuate," she said. "Every ship that surrenders will be allowed to leave. Every escape pod will be recovered. Every life that wishes to flee may do so." Catherine felt a moment of hope, a belief that perhaps humanity would show mercy after all. And then he saw the tactical display. The Kreeth infrastructure was gone, destroyed in the preceding months of warfare, their shipyards burned, their transport vessels shattered, their escape routes severed. 12 hours was not enough time. It was never meant to be enough time. The Kreeth Queen, the last of her kind, broadcast a response that the human translators rendered in cold, mechanical text. "We will not flee," she said. "We will not beg, we die as we lived, as conquerors, as predators, as the rightful masters of this galaxy." She paused, and her final words were directed at humanity itself. "You believe you have won," she said, "but you have only proven that you are worse than us. You are monsters wearing the skin of civilized beings, and the galaxy will never forget what you have done here." Admiral Chen did not respond. There was nothing left to say. Catherine stood beside Captain Tanaka on the observation deck as the Kreeth star collapsed, its death throes sending waves of radiation and fire across the system, consuming everything in its path. The homeworld died first, its atmosphere stripped away in seconds, its oceans boiling into steam, its surface cracking and melting as temperatures rose beyond anything life could endure. Then the colonies, the stations, the ships that had not fled. 2 billion lives ended in a matter of hours. Catherine watched until there was nothing left to watch, until the Kreeth system was nothing but expanding clouds of debris and the cooling remnants of a murdered star. Beside him, Captain Tanaka stood in silence, her face pale and her eyes fixed on the destruction. "Is it done?" Catherine asked. "Yes," she said, and her voice was barely a whisper. "It is done." "How do you feel?" Tanaka was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, there was no triumph in her voice, no satisfaction, no relief. "Empty," she said. "I thought I would feel something, justice or victory or peace, but there is nothing, just emptiness." She turned to look at him, and her eyes were wet with tears she refused to let fall. "Do not pity them," she said. "They made us into this, they forced us to become the thing that could destroy them, and now we have to live with it." She looked back at the fading light of the dead star. They do not have to live with anything at all. 43 years later, Ketharin sat in his chambers in the Galactic Conquered archives, his body old and his eyes dim, but his mind still sharp as he completed his final entry on the human species. His report had been classified at the highest level, sealed away where only the eldest members of the Conquered could access it, and he had spent decades answering questions about its contents. Today, a young researcher named Velthan had come to ask about humans, her eyes bright with curiosity, and her data tablet ready to record his words. "You spent 5 years among them," she said. "You watched their war from beginning to end. You are the only non-human to have witnessed the Kreeth extinction firsthand." She leaned forward. "Eager? What are humans really like?" she asked. Ketharin considered the question for a long time, memories flooding through his mind like water through a broken dam. He remembered the Marine who painted devils on her armor for luck. He remembered the crew of the Adelaide, ramming their broken ship into a Kreeth carrier to buy 6 minutes for their fleet. He remembered the 200 who stayed behind on Anchorage Station to protect secrets they would never live to use. He remembered Captain Tanaka, weeping silently as 2 billion enemies died in nuclear fire. "They are kind," he said finally, "patient and generous and curious about everything. They build hospitals on worlds that are not their own. They rescue ships from species who fear them. They create art that makes you weep for beauty you did not know existed." He smiled, and it was a sad expression. "They are the most creative species I have ever encountered," he said, "and the most compassionate. They feel deeply and love fiercely, and they will sacrifice everything for those they care about." Velthan recorded his words, her expression confused. "Then why is your report classified?" she asked. "What could possibly be dangerous about such a species?" Ketharin was silent for a long moment. He looked at the sealed archive that contained the Kreeth records, the only proof that the Dominion had ever existed, a species of 200 billion reduced to data files and historical footnotes. "Because they are also the only species in recorded history," he said slowly, "to look upon the annihilation of an entire civilization, every world burned, every life extinguished, every trace of their existence erased from the galaxy." He turned back to the young researcher, and his ancient eyes were heavy with memory. "And call it justice?" Velthan stared at him, her tablet forgotten in her hands. "I do not understand," she said. Ketharin nodded, and his voice was tired. "I know," he said, "neither did the Kreeth." He gestured toward the door, dismissing her, and as she left, he turned to look out the window at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, humanity was building and growing and reaching for the future, their terrible war already fading into history, their capacity for both love and destruction unchanged. They were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and the most wonderful. And Ketharin was grateful, every single day, that they had decided to be humanity's friend. Because he had seen what happened to their enemies. And he would never, ever forget.